Everybody, Jim and Eric here to talk about some big developments that happened this past weekend on Marvel front on both film and television. First of all, Edgar Wright no longer directing Ant-Man, and Drew Goddard no longer directing Daredevil, which is the Netflix TV series. First of all, thoughts on both of these projects losing guys basically back-to-back like that?
I mean, look, it sucks. In both cases, I certainly am a fan of both guys, was excited to see what they do with it, so I'm disappointed in both cases they won't be doing it. We'll talk, I think, in a second about the differences, but I do think they're very different in that Edgar leaving is the shocker in that he's been with the movie for so long, and the movie's very close to production.
Yes.
Goddard, there's other extenuating circumstances. He was going to direct the pilot, but more importantly, he was going to be the showrunner. But they quickly revealed who's replacing him. It's someone else that we like, Stephen S. Tonight. It just seems like the Daredevil situation is very different from the Ant-Man one, although I think in both cases, our overall message here is don't freak out on what it means for everything.
Well, in here's why, is that as much as it sucks that Edgar, he'd worked for years, I think, what?
8?
Yeah, years on Ant-Man. Ultimately, this was work for hire. This wasn't a project that he had developed out of thin air on his own. This is a Marvel project. They own it, and he was hired to do a job. And I think maybe some of the fans might not understand that this happens all the time in Hollywood.
Sure.
People will work on a project for years, developing it. It's their baby, and then it falls apart. Somebody else ends up making it. So it sucks, but it's kind of just business as usual.
Yeah, and I also think it's kind of what we have to accept to get this Marvel Cinematic Universe that we're all so excited about. We love how it links together. They're making a lot of cool choices as far as who's directing their films. I mean, their next two movies are James Gunn and Joss Whedon again.
I mean, look, the Russo brothers and what they did with Winter Soldier.
They're thinking outside the box. But you can't just do whatever you want because it has to connect to these other movies.
Yeah.
And we don't know exactly what happened. There's been reports that there was issues with the script that Edgar disagreed with Marvel on. But at the end of the day, if Marvel said you can't do this, as much as I say, sure, Edgar is a great filmmaker, I'd love to see Edgar Wright's creations, there will be limits because it is part of a connected universe, and there will be repercussions if he changes something that they don't want changed for another movie.
Yeah. Now on the Daredevil front, it's a different thing in that there wasn't this sort of creative differences issue that came up. In fact, if anything, he just opted to do a different Marvel thing. Why don't you tell folks about that?
Right. Goddard it was announced fairly recently that he was writing and then directing the Sinister Six for Sony, so not part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but another Marvel property. And once they announced that, a lot of us did say, how's that going to work schedule-wise when he is the showrunner, the guy overseeing the Daredevil series? How can he also be prepping a movie he's directing?
Yeah, it's like with JJ doing Episode 7. Well, you can't do that and Track 3, no matter how much lip service you're giving to that.
Right, or even going back further when Abrams did not work actively on Lost after the pilot because he got Mission Impossible 3. It's like you just have to make these decisions. But Marvel was quick to say they're still using his scripts for the first 2 episodes. And that he will be involved as a consultant. Now, look, we don't know how much because he's going to be busy writing and directing a movie, but it does sound like this was a different situation. It really just was a scheduling thing. Unfortunately, it happened the day after the Edgar Wright news, so I understand why it was easy for people to go, oh my God, everything's going wrong at Marvel. But I think they're 2 very different situations.
Try to allay people's fears even more here with, Marvel. As you said, they've taken chances on people before.
Yeah.
Do you think people are being way too knee-jerk here in saying that Marvel is going off the rails? I mean, the same folks who were so bummed that they're not going to do Edgar Wright's Ant-Man are also salivating for James Gunn's Talking Raccoon movie.
Absolutely, yeah. And look, I understand. I do think there's a reason to be nervous about how Ant-Man will end up now because they're sticking to the schedule, and that means whoever they hire now will not have very much time at all except to just take over. So
it's a hired gun. I mean, but again, isn't Marvel Studios really? It's a producer-driven entity. It's like Eon Productions and the James Bond films. Most of the directors, even though they've had a James Gunn and the Russo brothers, at the end of the day, at least on the film side, it's Kevin Feige calling the shots. You have to just be a shooter in a lot of ways.
I don't think it's that clear-cut because I do think they want people that have an interesting angle to it. That's why they're hiring people like Gunn or even the Russos. to give it some different flair, but yeah, it's not going to be just do what you want. It can't be. And again, it speaks to the fact that what we all love, how they're all connected, means that there's going to be limits. There just has to be. And I'll even say, look, Iron Man 3, very polarizing movie as it turned out, that I loved, I think you loved.
Yep,
but let's look at what they did with the Mandarin and how that was Shane Black saying, hey, I have this idea for the Mandarin. Marvel said, sure. And then guess what? People freaked out about it. What if Edgar wanted to do something similar? What if he had his Mandarin? I'm not saying I wouldn't want to see it, but Marvel might have had some issues, and Iron Man 3 might have made them extra gun-shy.
Right.
So you're going to have that thing where filmmakers have their own great ideas, but this is not a studio where anything goes. It's got to be a compromise, and that's difficult, and some people might want to compromise more than others, but that's how it is.
Well, we don't know yet who's going to be directing Ant-Man.
Yeah.
We do know, of course, as you said, who's going to be directing Daredevil, so we're going
to... And I want to mention, by the way, Stephen S. tonight, watch Spartacus if you haven't, because it's a kick-ass show, and I think it'll give a lot of people hope for Daredevil as far as this guy doing an action series.
Do you think ultimately Ant-Man, they'll just get perhaps a TV director, somebody who basically is just going to hit the ground running and shoot the script?
Maybe, but it could be something like the Russos, who had done like one feature years ago, but certainly had something to prove, because it was like, oh, you're the Community guys. How are you going to do this big action movie? And they're like, here's how, it's going to be awesome. So this could be a great opportunity for someone, people have mentioned like Michelle MacLaren, who has gotten so much acclaim. She directed some of the best Breaking Bad episodes. She's directing Game of Thrones now. Everyone's waiting for her to get a feature. Someone like that, again, they won't have time to personalize the movie, but they might have time to prove, I can make this movie look kick-ass,
My final thought on this is, I bet you they're going to end up going to one of the directors that have been mentioned for some of their other projects.
Yeah.
And I think it's Jonathan Levine, the guy who did Warm Bodies and 50-50, who's been mentioned for Doctor Strange. I somehow have a feeling like, you know what? Why don't you go ahead and do this one instead?
Or maybe people said maybe Joe Johnston, who worked with them before, or someone like that, who's,
James Gunn, maybe he'll do that.
Exactly, yeah, who knows?
All right, guys. Well, we're going to have plenty more to talk about all this in the days, months, years ahead, so keep it locked here at IGN.